Good evening, everybody, to our first of 2024 Raleigh Astronomy Club indoor meetings. We'll go ahead and start. So first of all, let's talk a little safety. There's wires in the back, and there's boxes in the back, and there's lots of people and purses and things of that nature. So be careful, don't trip on anything. Anybody know CPR in here? Raise your hand. Wow, there's a lot of people. Okay, I need somebody to raise their hand that will be the emergency 911 caller in case we need it. Right. Fire equipment is in the back. There's a fire extinguisher. Thank you. Okay. You guys at home, please be careful of your surroundings. So you guys see the emergency exits are that way and this way and out. Don't take the elevator. Oh. Okay. Naveen, do you want everybody to hold their questions till the end? Okay. So you can raise your hand and ask questions, but if you ask a question, we ask that you raise your hand and let us bring you a microphone because the people at home can't hear you if you're talking over there, even if you're as loud as like Rob Parsons or something. I mean, you know. Anyway. Anna, you want to talk on any of these or you want to do that later? Okay. So we have upcoming events. Astronomy Days is coming up. Setup's Friday, Saturday and Sunday. Big event for the year. We have RAC OBS the next weekend. At the same time, we have First Fridays under the stars. We do have on February 10th, we have a class being given by Tim Russ. It'll be virtual, getting into astronomy. And we're going to tell all of that at the business meeting. Anna's going to tell all of us. The Abbott's Creek Science Fair is on the 15th, and on the 16th, we have our next indoor meeting with Steph and Will. And then we have the Willard on the 21st. And it's not every single time. They've gone through and figured out when to do them all based on talking to the Museum of Natural Sciences. But most of the time. If anybody wants to head out after this, they're going to socialize over at Sammy's. Same place we go most of the time. Can I get a head count if anybody thinks they're going? 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, I got to count him too. Okay. Oh, okay. So tonight's presenter is Naveen. I got to go to glasses. Sorry. So Naveen is one of your acting co-chairs, and he's been he enjoys views of the night sky through eyepieces and through photography. Makes me very jealous with his abilities. He tried astrophotography with an 8-inch Dob and a phone camera. He realized there had to be a better way to do it. And in this talk, you will learn some of his journey into astrophotography and the kinds of things you can do with and without a telescope and star tracker. Naveen? Yep.
All right, sorry for the switcheroo there. All right, welcome everybody. So, show of hands, who's taken pictures of stuff in space? Okay, quite a few. Who have been happy with what they've taken? I've been very happy with what I've done. Chris, you're not raising your hand? You're not happy? Well, I'm happy with the pictures you've taken. All right, so some people have dabbled in this. Anybody tried simple, like on a tripod with a, a camera, maybe even your phone? Yeah, good. All right. So before we dive into that, those you didn't raise your hand, just a quick definition. Astrophotography is basically taking pictures of stuff in space. So you've got your planets, you've got lunar photography, and you've got deep space objects. So clusters of stars to nebulosity, asteroids, et cetera. There's a lot of stuff out there. Some of it is fleeting, happens once in a lifetime or once ever. A lot of things are out there over a long period of time. When I got into this, as Dana said in the intro, I started off with an 8-inch Dobsonian. My kids got it for Christmas. Was in 2020, I think, right? So the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn. And I looked through that Dob through the eyepiece, and it blew my mind seeing the rings of Saturn. I hadn't seen it before, and it was just really cool. So I took my phone out, as I'm sure several of us have done. It's like, can I get a picture of that? Well, the answer is yes. It never is going to look like what it looked like through the eyepiece for your eye, but it's an option. You can go more than that. Like that's called afocal photography, where you are taking a picture through the optics with your through the eyepiece with a phone or with another camera. So I tried going down that path for a little bit. I learned a lot about the fact that the Earth rotates, and that means the stars are moving as you're taking the picture. And a Dobsonian with 1200 millimeter focal length is probably not a great idea. So Dobsonian, if you don't know, it's a Newtonian telescope. It's got a mirror in the back, and it just sits there. It's great for, I've still been using that scope. It's great because you point it at something, it stays there. You push pull. It's really easy to use. There's no electronics. But stars zip across your field of view very, very, very quickly. I don't have any examples, pictures of those kinds of events or those pictures in this slideshow, but I think the longest exposure I could do was probably less than 1 second before you start seeing the stars elongate. Now, this is me just starting out 3 years ago. If I were to do it today, it would be a much deeper study, and I'd know what I was actually looking at. But that doesn't mean you can't use your phone for astrophotography. You can still point it at the night sky. It's really interesting. My phone, I've got a Pixel 7. It's got an astrophotography mode. So if you turn it on to astrophotography mode, point it up at a patch of the night sky, ask somebody like Anna in the back, like how it actually works. I haven't actually gotten this to work satisfactorily for myself. It'll take an exposure or multiple exposures over, I think, a 4-minute period, and stack them, and you'll get to see more of what's up there than what you could see with your naked eye. It's pretty interesting. Uh-oh. There we go. Before I tried doing anything like that, there was a lunar eclipse, 2022, day before my oldest kid's birthday, sitting out on the front porch, and this is what I saw coming in. So big bank of clouds over here. I think 5 minutes after I took this shot, which I just leaned up against my porch to steady my hand, 5 minutes later, the sky was black. There was nothing. I'm like, well, the lunar eclipse is shot. I'm not going to have my opportunity. But this is with the Pixel 4 back then. Held it in my hand. I'm like, there's the moon, and I thought it was kind of cool seeing the clouds come in, a couple of bright stars. But this is what I was talking about with the Milky Way shot. So this is something that Anna took in August last year out at Howell Woods, one of the observing sites we have, at an event for I think Perseids meteor shower. I don't know, Anna, did you just have it on like a car or something to prop it up? Set it up on your windshield wipers. Okay. Okay.
The biggest problem is that there are two modes.
Hey, Dana, real quick, can you give her the mic?
I'm sorry. Yeah. Oh, I was just saying there are two modes for the Pixel. There's one where it's less steady, I guess, and one where it's more steady. So if you're holding it, it'll show a moon and you can click that. It'll only do a shorter exposure time. It limits it, I think, to maybe 2 minutes maximum. But then if you prop it up on something and it recognizes that it's stable for a handful of seconds, the moon will change into stars and you can click that and it'll go the full length. But you can't touch it or yeah, it'll mess up. But yeah, that one was with the longer time. So probably
Okay.
4.5 minutes, maybe.
Okay, so I've learned something tonight. That's probably what I've been doing wrong, not waiting for the stars to show up.
It's tricky though, because you have to, sorry. It's tricky though,
Right.
because you have to, for example, if you prop it up on something, you have to be able to reach around your phone to tap the button, and you can't tap it too hard or it'll recognize that it moved and it will go back to the moon. So it's really finicky. So you have to be able to sometimes, like when I went to Wilmington a long time ago last year for work, and I went on the beach and I went up to one of the like just the little bridges that go onto the beach, and I basically propped my phone up on the handrail where that part of the phone was sticking off the handrail, and I went underneath and tapped it. So you kind of have to do stuff like that, or use a tripod to make it
Yeah,
work.
yeah. Okay, I have tried on the roof rack of my car, like lean it on the roof rack so you can get up underneath. I still am doing something wrong because I've never gotten anything like this, which Dana, and Frank has a question up here as well. Once,
So where was this taken?
Hal Woods. Yeah.
Al Woods. Hold on, Frank.
Oh, with this camera I have in my hand, I can take a handheld telescope picture of the moon. But on this picture here, I've heard some people say you can take the focal, I think it's 500 divided by the focal length, that's what's set on in millimeters. And that will give you how long you can expose before you start to get star trails.
Yeah, it's called the rule of 500, something to do with the focal length, and there's more advanced formulas. I'm not going to present on it here, but there's some more advanced formulas depending on where you're pointed in the night sky and the sensor you have, and how big your pixels are. It's a way to figure out when is the star going to move from one pixel and bleed over into the next one, and you start seeing elongation. So,
However, with this camera here, the small sensor allows for telescope magnifications with a lens that only goes just 3 inches. But due to the small sensor, it can't take long exposure to the night sky where you still need your regular DSLR.
okay, cool. Thank you, Frank. So yeah, any comments, questions as we go, please raise your hand. Happy to have more of a conversation than presenting towards people. So we will get into DSLRs. But first, so this was shot with my Pixel 7. I set it up between two houses. I actually had to crop out the roof of my house and the roof of my neighbor's house. But it's Pleiades, and I didn't look this up to confirm it before presenting. So if I'm wrong, I'm sorry, but I think that was Mars. And let's see, I had printed this little adapter, has some Velcro on it, and I just slot my phone in it on a tripod to keep it steady. Do I sell them? No, but it's really simple. There's also, I did get a 3D printer again recently. My older one had broken. When I got my tripod, it came with one of these thingies. I don't know what they're called, but it's basically a clamp that'll clamp onto your phone. We use them for the iPads that are running the video for our meetings as well. So that's another option if you. Maybe I should put this in the raffle. I will never use this. I have my printed one. It works great. So I'm in about Bortle 6, maybe high end of 5. So naked eye, I can see Pleiades is there, but there's no way I saw any, well, and Mars, but don't see the other stars. So it's really neat to use your phone to see what else is out there. But as Frank was brought up, DSLRs are another option.
Experiment. I took a picture of your screen
Mm.
with the contrast on the camera on the picture control turned up high, which you might use if you're in a light blue sky. And then I took another with the picture contrast at low, and there's a big difference.
Brightness, yeah. So who has a DSLR? Who uses their DSLR regularly? Okay. So when I got into taking pictures of stuff, and I tried taking the DSLR I had, well, actually, it's my wife's DSLR. She wasn't using it, so I grabbed it for about a half a year, at least. So it was collecting dust, and I'm like, well, let me see what I can do. Tried to put it onto that Dobsonian I mentioned. Didn't work out for other reasons. I couldn't get focus with the DSLR on that particular telescope. And I know now that would have been a terrible idea. But what I did is I started putting it onto tripod and trying things out with that, just because I had never really used a DSLR before. Read the manual. My wife saw me reading. It's like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm reading the manual. I don't know how to use this thing. And I still probably really can't say I know how to, but it's like, oh, turn off noise suppression and a whole bunch of other settings that make astrophotography a little bit easier. But this is something I took right when I was starting to get started in astrophotography. So 3 years ago now, a little bit over 3 years. We had a little tiny tripod, the ones with like articulating legs. And I put it on that, put it in my driveway. The sun was setting, the moon was chasing it. And I took, I think, a 5-second exposure. I don't remember what the other settings were. And I blew it, like literally blew out the moon. So that was the crescent overexposed quite a bit, but Earthshine, learned about that. So it's not something that I really had noticed before, but now when I go out, see the moon, sun is setting, naked eye, I'm like, there's some Earthshine. You can just see it. And what it is sunlight hitting the Earth, bouncing back off the Earth onto the dark side of the moon. So kind of have a bit of a fascination with that. I've taken a couple other pictures over the years now of Earthshine, but this is just an accident, a happy accident.
How do you get the Earthshine to show up and the crescent not overexposed?
How do you get, okay, to repeat, how do you get the Earthshine to show up and the crescent not overexposed? Well, you could do, it's really what you do with composite photography, Frank.
To do that, I would have to turn off. I would have to take an exposure for the Earthshine, for the crescent, and then turn off the crescent.
Okay, so taking 2 pictures would be one option. Another option is you can take this one picture that doesn't overexpose it too much, where you can take the crescent for one layer, and then you layer in the same picture again, and you overexpose just the Earthshine side of it. And then you don't allow the crescent to be overexposed in that second layer. So you can create a composite with processing, Photoshop or other programs.
Cameras have
Yeah. We're really bad about remembering the microphone. Sorry, people.
Some of the cameras have HDR capability. I was automatically built in. I was
Oh.
just wondering if anybody had tried doing that with the
No.
HDR capable camera and on that setting to see what happens.
I've tried that, but it doesn't work.
Yes. So Frank says he's tried it and it didn't
So-
work.
I've tried that, but it didn't work.
Didn't work out.
Well, with particularly with clouds.
Okay.
In clouds.
I wonder if it's the fact that they're moving between the
So
frames.
like for clouds, I will take a picture of the clouds while the moon's completely hid.
Mhm.
And then when the moon comes back out, take another picture
Mhm.
directly, and then put the moon wherever you want it. You
Mhm.
see through the picture that's frozen on the screen that you've already taken. And then you can put the moon's exposure any what you want,
Okay.
using what I call the glorious double exposure.
Got another comment or question?
Was gonna say that in cameras and in photography in general, there's also, you can, it's also called dynamic range. So your camera can work best at its native ISO. So by lowering your ISO, you can get higher dynamic range while keeping the signal to noise ratio very high.
Yeah.
So most of the cameras with the best dynamic range are usually at about 500 ISO, 400 ISO, to 800, to up to 1600.
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on the camera. In particular, I know this Canon SL2, it was about 200 ISO. Yeah, but I have also a Canon T2i that I use. I run it at ISO 100. But there's a really great website called Photons to Photos, where you can pick different cameras and it will show you graphs of different characteristics of the sensor. And I've seen some of them where it's like, 800 is the ideal, depending on what you're trying to do. I mean, ideal is subjective, but yeah, it depends on the sensor. And while we're on this topic, I can geek out on astrophotography stuff like crazy, but there's Sharp Cap, move. Oh, being directed to move. Sharp Cap is some software that we can use to program in taking pictures. It's really good for doing electronically assisted astrophotography, or EAA. It also has a sensor analysis capability, and you can get it to do analysis of your sensor, your camera. So you can, see the characteristics of how it works. It's a really, and I believe that sensor analysis is free. Other features of Sharp Camera. Oh, Steve says it's not free. Okay.
I can describe what dynamic range was, but basically it's the difference between highlights and the shadows. So the more data you can capture. Oh, oh. Okay, so I was saying that dynamic range is basically the difference between the highlights and the shadows. So having a higher dynamic range means that you can capture more highlights and more shadows. So by lowering your ISO, you're able to get more of the data from the bright side and as well from the dark side. And you can probably throw in Lightroom or Photoshop to get more detail out of the shaded area.
That DSLR you showed, what was its sensor size?
The DSLRs I've used are, the question was the sensor size, APS-C.
Full frame.
No, APS-C is a crop sensor. I don't have any full frame sensors.
Full frame, you can run ISOs and do a whole lot more zooming factor.
Yeah, okay. So moving on to the next picture, this is the eclipse. So the clouds actually cleared right at totality on that night 2 years ago, which is really great. This is that Canon SL2 sitting on a tripod. This tripod without all the other mess on top, which I'll talk about later. 75 millimeter focal length. One thing, if you're trying this stuff out, like if it's a lunar eclipse or the upcoming solar eclipse, try a lot of different settings. Try different ISOs, different exposures. I tried from like sub-second exposures at different ISOs for this up to like 10-second exposures. I wish I could, I don't remember off the top of my head what this one was, but a lot of them were pretty garbage. So you don't want to miss your opportunity because these things don't happen very often. But I like this picture in particular because the other thing I was doing was looking through, binoculars that night. And this one reminds me of about the same field of view I saw through the binoculars, which was, I'd say, better than this picture. Experiencing it, live was better, but I still think this is nice. Caught some of the clouds wisping by the top. I think this was a 5-second exposure. Now, this is not one of my pictures. I have yet to dabble with star trails. This is from Joe Pettit, who's a RAC member. If I ever have any questions about star trails, Joe's the person I'm going to go to first. He does a lot of star trails. This one in particular captures like an airplane flying by as well. Other things that he does with just honorable mention, I don't have a picture of it. Shuttle launch, or not shuttle, rocket launches happen at Virginia, West Virginia, even down in Florida. You can see them from here, and they're pretty low, but he'll take pictures of those with his DSLR on a tripod and do time lapses and videos. And if you're a RAC member and watching the members or imaging groups, he'll post links to those periodically. They're worth a watch. If I remember correctly, this is just short of 5 hours of time. Really illustrates the motion of the sky over a 5-hour period. You can see where, celestial north is. So that's roughly Polaris, the North Star, and everything else just pivots around that. When we do long exposure astrophotography, we're trying to compensate for that motion. Otherwise, we get this. So this was
This is the part where it gets expensive.
well, in this presentation it doesn't, but yeah, this is a rabbit hole that has it just kind of sucks money out of your pocket as you go down. So this was does anybody know what this is? Can guess? Oh God, I put it up there. Thanks, Dana. All right, so yes, this is Orion Nebula. Here, the really bright streaks, which should be stars, are the trapezium. Thank you. I always go to Trifid in my head for some reason. If you're looking, and this is something if you haven't tried this before, even around here in light polluted areas, if you have a pair of binoculars, cheap binoculars, doesn't matter. Point it at the sword in Orion. This is the center star, quote star, it's a small star cluster in the sword. And you can see the nebulosity around it through a pair of binoculars even. If you have a telescope, absolutely go look at it too. It's pretty cool. So this is, I think, 30 seconds at 300 millimeters. So things are zipping by pretty quickly. So at 300 millimeter focal length, I said earlier I was trying to do this with a 1200 millimeter focal length, so 4 times as long. That would have been a much longer, faster streak. Don't recommend it. But so in this presentation, it's about not using a telescope and not using a tracker, star tracker. Now I'm bending the definition of tracker a little bit, and we're going to look at do-it-yourself trackers. So this is where I went next. You could say I kind of have an obsessive, like get deep into a hobby kind of mentality, and I know that. So to slow myself down so I could learn, I decided to try and build something myself. So this is a picture of 5 different barn door trackers that are on Wikipedia. I built an isosceles and then a curved rod. And what it's doing is you have a rod that is slowly getting pushed by something that's turning, and it's opening it up. Think like a book opening up, and I have mine here we can look at later. It's basically opening up at the same rate the Earth is rotating to compensate for that rotation. And the idea is that whatever your optics, your camera, I've put my cell phone on it for, just see what happened. It should stay relatively stable, should. So my first prototype, some 2x4s, a super cheap hinge from Home Depot, I think. My wife's SL2, and then the tripod I have over here. And it was manually cranked. I still have the handle. I don't have the rest of it. I have the handle sitting in my office because I spent time making sure it would be smooth on my finger and comfortable to use. But the idea is you set that rod up at the right radius so that one turn of that handle equals 1 minute. And then what I don't show here is there's a piece of Velcro. I had a watch with an actual physical second hand that went around. I got in the second grade, and the second hand glows in the dark. And it works. So this is another 30-second shot on the side. If you look, especially at some of the fainter stars on the periphery, though, it's not great because I'm a human being and sitting there watching a second hand and trying to keep focused on what I'm doing and not vibrate things just doesn't work. I did also a test with 2.5 minutes, because at 2.5 minutes, I'm like, I'm done. Can't do this anymore. So it worked really great as a prototype, a proof of concept. So I spent a long time with CAD software, learning the CAD software, and then 3D printing a barn door tracker. So I have the pictures up here. I have the actual barn door tracker here, which, you know, if we want to after the presentation, happy to take a look at it, talk about it. All of this is documented out on GitHub if you're interested in trying to build something like this yourself. So it's running with a Raspberry Pi Pico, which is like a $5 small computer. It's got a small stepper motor in it to move. In this picture, you see a yellow gear. There's a step, it just turns that gear at just the right rate to compensate for the Earth's rotation. And the rod is curved because in this, having a straight rod just meant too many things were having to move around. So the curved rod was a journey in itself of getting a curved rod. I mean, you can't buy a curved rod. I tried building a form out of plywood and then heating it up with a blowtorch to try and bend it. That didn't work. What I ended up doing, a little side tangent because this tickles me today. I had a random aluminum trash can in my garage. I put it on that piece of plywood. And I'm like, this is not working. Took a rod, a separate one that wasn't messed up by me trying to heat it up and bend it, and just, and it sprung back to exactly the right curve. Like, okay. I still have that trash can. I do plan, so this is with teeth. So it's like gears meshing. And I've found that causes some vibration, which is not the end of the world. You have to toss out like 40% of the pictures if you care a lot about the star shapes. But I've been working on, and I've got it sort of kind of working at home, a belt-driven version. So instead of the two plastic gears touching, having a belt, a toothed belt going between them. I don't know if that's going to work really well because there's other problems. I need to reverse the direction of the gear in the software, and then the belt is grabbing sometimes on the gear. So I'm like, can't win, but we'll see. I need to get it finished and take it out. And, huh?
Why don't you go down through the tripod and describe how you use it?
Oh, okay. Sure. Camera. Barn door tracker. The controller for the stepper motor, which is right there. Raspberry Pi Pico. That has got to be the battery. Yeah. Well, it's kind of blurry into the angle. It's weird. This over here is an intervalometer, which is wired up to the camera. So if you don't know, intervalometer just allows you to have the camera take pictures periodically without having to touch anything. You just program it and say, every 5 seconds, take me with this setup, I was taking 4-second exposures. Every 5 seconds, take a 4-second picture. Fun fact, while you can push the button physically on your camera and take pictures really quickly until it hits like buffer and needs to write it to the SD card, intervalometer might not work that way. So test it out in the daytime. I found I had to wait 4 or 5 seconds between each exposure, or it would say it was taking a picture and not do anything, which would be very frustrating to lose a night. So
And make sure you have a very strong tripod.
Have a strong tripod. Okay, so I don't. My tripod is this tripod and it really is not very strong. So what I did, this is a backpack that I had carried stuff in, and I've got a 15-pound dumbbell in it. Just kind of hold it down. Because I happen to have it in the garage. I'm like, all right, fine. So, you know, it worked.
And if you don't have a remote control, set your camera on a 2-second delay.
Set camera. Okay, so the intervalometer allows you to set a delay. I usually go 10 seconds. But yeah, a good point to when you push the button, let everything settle down before you start taking pictures. So this is that same Great Orion Nebula, you know, different orientation with the Canon SL2 and the 300 millimeter lens. Much better result than that nice streaky picture we first showed. So this slowed me down a lot and allowed me to understand what did I like about taking pictures. I really, really like this kind of stuff, deep space, deep sky. The processing side of it is fascinating to me. But before we get into some of that, I just want to talk briefly, and Frank brought up lenses earlier. So, you know, the lens you used is a factor to consider. I was using the kit lenses that came with my wife's DSLR. I've since bought some better lenses. I have one actually, I didn't bring it because it's on a rig right now. It's a 135 millimeter Rokinon lens. It's not gonna, I mean, everything costs money. So this is to Chris's point, like this is where stuff starts to get expensive. It's not one of like super high-end lenses. It's oops. I really enjoy it, and every night that it's clear, I put it out if I can.
Was that your lens collection right there?
I wish, no. I don't have that many bags of money laying around. This one, so this is an example of things going wrong, but not too bad. I was out at Three Bears, and I was going to use, I had a 20 millimeter lens. I was going to use my barn door tracker and Canon T2i, which is modified so that it can collect hydrogen alpha, which is all this nice red stuff. But one of the bolts on the barn door tracker was loose. So when I put the camera on it, it just kind of went, whoop, and I had no tools with me to tighten it up. So plan B was just put the camera on the tripod and see what happened. It's pretty noisy, but it's, you know, that's the Orion Nebula again. Not really a theme in these, but like everything is that object. Horsehead, Flame, Barnard's Loop, Rosette Nebula, Harp Cluster with cone, I think Monkey Head, Jellyfish or something. Like there's a whole pile of stuff in the sky. Taking wide field shots on a tripod can be really fun because you get to see a lot of different things. And I went to Colorado a year and a half ago, and the Denver Astronomical Society has a dark site outside of Denver. I drove like an hour east. And this is a mosaic of two pictures off with that 20 millimeter lens and a Canon T2i, which is crop sensor, 2 10-second exposures. So yeah, I got star trailing, but I didn't care. But you think it's coming out of Colorado Springs, light pollution.
Well, I mean, it's blown up like that, so yeah. Oops. It's almost a moot point as far as star trailing goes.
True, true.
Yeah.
But when I tend to look, so yeah, I gotta stop.
Yeah, I feel you.
Same thing, camera on the tripod at the same site, and just took a picture at the horizon and took more pictures going up, turned the camera around and back down, and then knit them together. I showed it to my wife horizontal, and she's like, oh, it'd be nice if it was curved. I'm like, okay, it looks pretty cool. But it's really neat to be able to, as I said, you can see all sorts of stuff. Like this is the Andromeda Galaxy. I think, can't remember, I think Pleiades was somewhere over there that got cropped out, but there's a whole bunch of stuff over here. It's really cool to look at. Okay. Yes, Doug. Microphone?
I'm sorry. So in that photograph, and Chris and I are kind of maybe in agreement with this. So where exactly, are you outside of Colorado Springs with this, or where are you at?
East of Denver.
Okay. Are you near Kelly Dahl National Forest, or are you up in the mountains there, or?
No, so the east is in the, I guess.
Oh, east
plain.
of Denver. Yeah. Okay.
Not towards the mountains.
So that's Denver then over there in your.
No, that's more southerly. So there were 3 light bubbles you could see.
Mhm.
So Colorado Springs, Denver, and Fort Collins are the major
Okay.
cities.
Oh, yeah. But
I'm
just,
pretty sure that
just
had
above
those.
that though, and this is what we're curious about, are you getting in the zodiacal light?
I don't have this in the presentation, but I did with the Rokinon
Yeah.
on a lark. I pointed at Jupiter, which
Yeah.
was off in the east, and yes, I did
Yeah.
get that. It was
That-
because the
that-
higher elevation was
right.
very dark, and to the east it's even darker because there's like
Yeah.
nothing out there, other than like must be a farm or something. That's more northeast.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I maybe after the presentation, I can bring that one up because that was a surprise. For those who don't know, it's like a faint green and red kind of cloudiness in the night sky that's not an aurora or light pollution. Yeah, happens that you can see it more at higher elevations. Come on, clicker. Okay, so back to the barn door. So last year, I used the barn door with that Rokinon, the 135 in my backyard, and took a couple pictures just to, for fun. Just wanted to share those briefly. So this is Pleiades. You start seeing some fainter dust around it as well, which is something I'm enamored with. I really like dusty pictures. So Witch Head Nebula. This is off Orion. So a nice nebula here. I do have interesting diffraction spikes with that camera lens running it wide open at f2. I've since started stopping it down to f2.8 and it gets rid of them, but back then I didn't care. I still don't really care, but
Yeah. Good for you.
And then again, Orion. So this is, think of Orion's laying on his back. This is the belt. So you have Flame Nebula near Alnitek, the Horsehead Nebula, and then the sword right here, which is Running Man, the Great Orion Nebula, and then the Jewel of, is it the Lost Jewel of Orion, which is the bottom star in the sword. Okay, so talked about taking pictures, using your phone, using a DSLR, maybe building something. But you don't have to. It's like part of astrophotography is the processing. Doesn't have to be. For me, it is. And one of the really fun things that I've done and others I know have done is just get somebody else's data. One of the great sources, or 2 great sources, probably more, is the Hubble Legacy Archive and James Webb Space Telescope data.
AKA the taxpayer.
Yeah, you've already paid
pictures.
for it. You might as well go use it. So this is Orion Nebula again, and processing of it from the master lights that I got off the archives website. It's really fun. It's super clean data. There's no noise. It's beautiful. So if you're interested, like, do I like this processing? There's actually, I don't know who it is now. There's a lady I was following for a little while, and she lived in New York, and all she does is take like data from telescopes like Hubble for galaxies and processes them. So like that's her jam. Like she's in a light polluted area and like instead of trying to collect the data herself, she's like, oh, just focus on the processing side. So that's, one option. Borrowing or renting equipment if you don't have something. And we have the telescope loaner program with Raleigh Astronomy Club. Several of the telescopes would have, equatorial mounts, which would compensate for the Earth's rotation. You have a DSLR, good option to get an adapter, which I probably have like 3 or 4 at home if anybody needs one. Hook up your camera and see what happens. There's a lot of trial and error, but it can be quite rewarding. If you have friends that have a DSLR, like, hey, are you using that thing or is it collecting dust? Maybe you can find something to borrow. So. And that's it. Any questions or comments? Thank you.
Anybody? Any questions? Here down front.
Actually, I don't know how to ask these, but do you use any processor, any program to process the images? Or?
Yeah, I use some software that's dedicated to astrophotography processing. Predominantly, it's called PixInsight. There are other options though. If you're starting to look into it, my first recommendation would be to look at something called Siril, SIRIL. It's open source and it's quite capable. Has a lot of the I'd say steps that made it hard for me to try to use free software when I started. Removing noise gradient, light gradients from like light pollution. It does a great job. Adjusting colors to get them back to true colors. What you should see, it does a really good job with that. And just generally, it's a reasonable piece of software for stacking. So shouldn't go too deep off into what this is. You take a whole lot of pictures generally, and you need to do what we call stack or integrate. So bring them all together into a single master picture, and it can do that for you. And as I said, it's free open source. It does a good job. Siril, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. I believe there's a video on, there's videos on YouTube on using Siril. There's, I think, some in the RAC YouTube channel as well.
Are there specific cameras that are like good for using astrophotography, or can you do with any camera?
Yes, there are cameras that are better at it than others, but it's a question of trade-off. So a DSLR, what happens when you take a long exposure is the sensor will get hot, and because it's getting hot, it affects what the sensor sees. Heat is basically going to be noise. It's going to be collected as data, and you can't tell like, oh, this bit of data was because it was hot, but this is from space. It all is one big bucket from the sensor's perspective. So you can take pictures with DSLR. I have used a Canon T2i for a lot of what I've done. No problem. It's a little noisier picture. You have some, background modeling, blues and greens in the background, but it's okay. The trade-off is quality for cost. So dedicated astrophotography cameras have cooling, active cooling. So that actually takes the sensor and cools it down like 35 degrees centigrade from ambient at most. Some can go further. But yeah, talking about the bags of money, like it starts to get expensive.
But yeah, I'll just add on to that a little bit. Yeah, what's cool about DSLR, it's what I started out with, and he mentioned stacking software, or mentioned Siril, and a concept called stacking. Something that will work in there with DSLRs as far as mitigating noise, along with the stacking, or what are called dark frames. I'm not going to go into that, but dark frames are something you can do to get rid of noise as well. And that's what you almost always have to do to get, really nice pictures with the DSLR camera. The other thing too, as you saw in Naveen's slideshow there, is that I mean, you can use a DSLR camera to pretty much do anything that his cell phone does. You know, of course, it's heavier than a cell phone, but you probably saw what Joe Pettit did with the streaking of the stars, and he took advantage of that streaking that we tried to avoid with long exposures of the night sky, and did those really pretty contemporary looking art pictures of star trails, right? So, yeah, DSLRs do have their limit, but if there is anything as far as current events go or upcoming events go, DSLRs I think would still be the king of cameras that you would want to use for the upcoming eclipse. So, because it's just so easy to use.
So some of us are fairly new to this. So like what kind of software are you using? That you're talking about editing this and stacking and things like and to formulate it.
You want the answer for starting out? Okay, for starting out, as I mentioned, Cyril does a good job with the stacking or creating a master file from multiple images. I've found it personally to be a little bit clunky if you do collect data from the same target over multiple nights, but it can be done. So Cyril's the place I would start. One of the drawbacks with Cyril and with PixInsight, which is the paid software I use, is the inability to do like layers. So I've bought years ago now Affinity Photo, which is relatively cheap and allows you to do layering like you could get within Photoshop, and again you can do some of the image manipulation in there. GIMP is another open source option, though the user interface is not as capable as within Cyril. And I think it's, Cyril just has much more going for it specific to the astrophotography side of things with like the Cyril, S-I-R-I-L. But yes, Doug.
Yeah, I've got the mic.
Oh, yes.
One thing you can do if you already have SharpCap, and you've got a set of images that you'd like to stack together, you can actually, you can actually choose basically the SharpCap cam, and you could reread your images back in. And so that allows you to do some image stacking. SharpCap doesn't, I mean, it is feature rich in many ways, but in that mode, you don't really have a lot of leeway in managing your colors and stuff like that. You only have one histogram to work with. So it is a bit limited, but if you already have SharpCap, and by the way, to get a license is only like $15 a year, I think it is. So it's pretty cheap, but it's certainly a one that you could consider.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's one thing I haven't played with much is SharpCap for image acquisition and processing. I know it's pretty popular from a EAA perspective, and I personally have a license because it's got other features that are great. Steve?
One of the other things you can take a look at too is something called AstroPixel Processor. It's a much simpler interface than either Cyril or PixInsight. It's somewhat more limited in what it does. But if you're and it's not a freeware program, but it's not expensive. It's $40 or $50 or something like that. But it's a pretty straightforward, very simple interface to get started on. And if you just want to take a start and you can spend the $40 or $50, take a look at it. It's a much simpler interface than all of the above.
Yeah. Okay.
AstroPixel Processor.
I know how you can tell if your photo, particularly if you're using a DSLR or camera, how you can tell if it's going to turn out right on the site. Pull up your picture and then hit the little zoom key. On the Nikons, most of them automatically go to 3x, but can be adjusted significantly higher or significantly lower. And particularly, if it's good and sharp at 3, a great picture it will be. And then set your screen brightness, unless you're out in the sun, on its lowest setting. This is how it will look when it's printed, and the battery will say thank you as well. My type of photography is what you would call elementary photography, where you see everything right on the site immediately. No fancy computer needed later.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thanks, Frank. Just while we're handing the mic around, so we have an imaging group, very active one, and we meet monthly. So another opportunity if people are interested, come join the group, or if you're interested in Discord, want to join the RAC Discord, we have quite a few people who talk astrophotography, data acquisition, processing, whatever. We all love to talk about the hobby, so bring your questions. Yes, sir.
Right. So a lot of astrophotography is about seeing things that you can't see, visual observing, right? The eye just isn't capable of seeing the details and the nebulosity and all of this. If your goal in taking pictures is just to try to duplicate what someone sees visually, is that a realistic possibility?
Yeah, so there are a lot of bright nebula out there where with the right filters visually, you can see more than what you would think. Like, I don't have a lot of experience with that, so I'm going to look to the other members of the club to speak to using like, I don't even use light pollution filters for visual, but like oxygen 3 filters for some of the nebula helps to tamp down the background light pollution and bring in the nebula. So it's going to be dim still, but you get that contrast and you can see it through the eyepiece.
Right. And I'm just trying to, like for people who haven't looked through a telescope and don't know and think they're going to see what they see when they see a picture that the Hubble took.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, they won't.
They won't, right? And so, yeah, trying to say, okay, here's what when you actually look visually at the Orion Nebula and trying to capture that on film as opposed to what astrophotography can bring in. I mean,
that's a good question. All right, we'll take this because it's longer focal length. If you were to look through binoculars or a telescope, what I've seen, at least in the areas around here at some of the dark sites, is so you'll see the star cluster here, trapezium, and then off to the side where these bands are, you'll see a faint blue. It's almost like wings. Yeah. So you can see that without any special filters and whatnot. I'm sure it's better in a darker site, but you're not going to see any of this down here. That's very faint.
And if you want to capture that with a photo,
okay. So when you take a picture like this, like Frank was saying, like you're focusing in on the stars. So if I don't do any processing, I'm going to see only the bright stars, those pinpoints. So what you're doing is you're taking the data, which is very faint, and you're trying to bring it up to something that you can actually see. So just when you do that processing step of trying to brighten up that faint nebulosity, just just light touch, just a little bit. And then you could absolutely, if I took this into some software right now, we could just drop the brightness down and it would get closer to what you would see visually.
Yeah, there's another thing you mentioned it earlier, the afocal photography, astrophotography, where you take and you mount your camera so that it's actually taking it through the eyepiece that you're using as you're viewing it. You then have to find some way to kind of rigidly put it there, and there's brackets and different things you can do to kind of lock the camera in. But that way you can sort of get it. I know exactly the question because people ask me that because, I'll send them my astrophotography pictures and they're like, wow, did you see that? And they're like, well, not exactly. And I think, but there are still a lot of things you can see and that's one of the ways that I had done that to try to at least help people that understand.
So I just want to say that while you're looking at all these great pictures, do try to understand something about what you're looking at. So the wing-like structure that Naveen was pointing out, we call that Orion wall. And then the very brightest central part of that structure is called the trapezium. And these are brand new stars that have only just been born. They're only about 1.5 light years apart from one another. And then there's 3 stars coming right off the trapezium that kind of are arcing right around that dark piece right there. The furthest one is A, B, and C. So C is closest. In that area is where we've actually detected new proteins and molecules for life in that area. So try to read other articles about the structure of that nebula. It's more than just, it's great. And by the way, this is an awesome shot, man. But just do try to understand something more than just the capture. It's really more about what's actually happening there in that nebula. This is a star forming region of our galaxy. And there's a lot of really interesting work going on there. And again, you've got many of the elements that actually go into forming the very kind of life that we see on our planet actually happening right there in that nebula. You're looking at it as it's happening. So do try to understand something more about what you're looking at.
Yeah, even understanding like kind of basic structure of the galaxy around us, I found fascinating. And like, where is this relative to us? How much can we see from here? The answer is not much if you're thinking it at the galactic scale, like of our own galaxy, because we're blocked. So yeah, there was a talk, might have been even 2 years ago. It should have been recorded on the structure of the Milky Way that was done here at RAC. That was fascinating.
For in the beginning, you had the Google Pixel phone, but any tips for like apps or something for iPhones?
I don't have any Apple devices. There are apps. Well, so even for the Pixel, you have the astrophotography mode built in, but there's other apps like Deep Sky Camera, where you can manually control the focus, exposure, and set up sequences of exposures. I'm sure there's stuff for Apple devices as well, similar. So Deep Sky Camera might be something to look into.
Okay.
Some people might wonder this. Could you look through a telescope and see an image like you'd see in some of these astronomy books with the bright colors and everything? Actually, on a photo, you can accumulate light for the eye. Once you get into the dark adapted, it's like a movie camera. You see the same thing whether you stay out a few minutes or a few hours. But with a camera, you can accumulate light and possibly even turn night into day. But sometimes I've wondered if some of these huge telescopes on the top of these mountains, if you could actually look through one, would you see a view sort of like a picture in a book?
I imagine no. I mean, you think about it, like the photos that we see are long exposure. So this one up on the screen was not even 20 minutes, but it's 20 minutes. Your eye can't collect photons for 20 minutes before it registers in your brain. It's instantaneous, or near enough. So that's, one of the limiting factors is just our biology. Maybe cyborg guys someday get, live stacking. Frank, or am I being cut off?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
So yeah, we're already past our cutoff time. So one more thing I want to go ahead and add, and Naveen had already talked about, we do have a imaging meeting where we just talk about what, the core of the subject matter here every month. And so, yeah, all these terms we throw around like histogram, noise, stacking, and all that kind of stuff. If you are having any interest in taking this to the next level, like Naveen just talked about, come to one of our meetings, and we'll fill you into and tell you everything, everything we know, and answer all your questions. So thank you guys.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
A couple of things to add, because I've got the mic in hand, is as you guys can tell, if you're new to this, say anything to an imager and they won't shut up trying to help you. Okay? It would not be a normal night if I didn't tell a bad dad? Do you guys know? What do you call a paper airplane that can't fly? Stationary. Okay, so we got now, by the way, Naveen, good job. And I'm very jealous of your abilities.